Hello again, Metas, and welcome to my updated Silent Anabasis guide. In this guide, I'll be covering how the weapon performs after the recent Frost Vortex rework, as well as the small but important change made to the Silent Anabasis itself. With these adjustments, the playstyle and overall functionality of the weapon have shifted slightly, so this guide will break down everything for you in detail. Whether you're here to understand the new mechanics or just to see if the Silent Anabasis is still worth using, I've got you covered. So with that being said, sit back, grab a drink and a snack, and let's dive right in. To start things off, let's take a closer look at the Silent Anabasis and the changes they introduced in this update. Previously, the Silent Anabasis had a 15% chance to trigger Frost Vortex on hit. However, with the latest patch, that chance has been reduced to 12%. At first glance, this might seem like a downgrade, but when we factor in the other improvements to Frost Vortex itself, the weapon still holds its ground as an absolute powerhouse. One of the most notable changes is that the developers have optimized the locations where the vortexes are generated, making them more likely to hit enemies or even deviants consistently. This subtle but impactful improvement ensures that while the trigger chance is slightly lower, the ability now feels more reliable and effective in actual combat situations. Hitting a target generates an ice crystal cooldown of 1.5 seconds. Ice crystals automatically shatter after 15 seconds, dealing frost elemental status damage equal to 100% psi intensity to nearby targets. Frost vortex damage bonus applies. Ice crystals can also be shattered by shooting them, which increases the damage they deal to 350 psi intensity. This is how you should be playing the gun. Make sure you pop your crystals. 40% damage against metahumans. Frost elemental damage plus 30%, plus an additional plus 8% for every ice crystal shattered for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So in turn, if you have 3 crystals and you pop all 3 of them, you get an extra 24% and you end up with a total of 54% frost elemental damage. Now let's take a look at the Frost Vortex changes. Before the update, Frost Vortex created a track with a 4.5 meter radius that dealt 30% psi intensity as status damage every second for 4 seconds, totaling 4 ticks. This meant each Frost Vortex dealt 120% psi intensity in total, and since you could have up to 2 Vortexes active at once, the maximum potential damage was 240% psi intensity. After the update, Frost Vortex still has a 4.5 meter radius, but now it deals 50% psi intensity every 0.5 seconds for 4 seconds, resulting in 8 ticks. This brings the total damage per Vortex to 400% psi intensity. However, you can now only have 1 Vortex active at a time. Despite this limitation, the overall damage output is significantly higher, an increase from 240% to 400%, which is roughly 66% more total damage. On top of that, Frost Vortex can now be generated in mid-air, and the damage is applied instantly upon creation, making it far more responsive and deadlier than before. So now let's take a look at the calibration options. When it comes to calibrations, this really comes down to personal preference, as both options are viable. However, I'll go over the 2 main setups and share my thoughts on each. Option 1 is the heavy style calibration with a double elemental damage suffix. This is my preferred choice, and in my opinion, the better of the 2 for most situations. The heavy style provides extra bullets, which makes the gun feel far more efficient in harder endgame content, especially when you're dealing with large swarms of heads. This calibration allows you to pop more crystals consistently, which is a big advantage in prolonged fights where maintaining control of the battlefield is crucial. Option 2 is a rapid shot style with double elemental damage suffix. This style will allow you to spawn crystals much faster, which can be used for quickly applying pressure. However, the downside is that you'll find yourself reloading quite often, sometimes right as you're aiming for a crystal. If you're confident in your reload management, then rapid shot can absolutely work for you, and you may even feel more responsive in certain scenarios. So for the accessories, I'm running the range compensator for the muzzle, compact reflex sight for the optics, elite vertical grip for my tactics, extended rifle mag for the magazine, and disintegrating rifle AP ammunition. This gives a grand total stability of 82, accuracy of 62, and a range of 40 with a reload speed of 42. For my secondary, I've decided to go for the bingo. 70% chance to trigger the bullseye upon hitting a weak spot. After switching weapons, the first hit will trigger the bullseye. After hitting a non-meta human unit, weak spot damage plus 25% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. After defeating a non-meta human unit with a weak spot hit, attack plus 15% for 20 seconds. For the bingo's calibration, you want to run a rapid shot style with double weak spot suffix. And for the accessories, I'm using the large break for the muzzle, advanced sniper sight for the optic, tactical SR mag for the magazine, and tungsten SR AP ammunition. This gives me a grand total stability of 83, accuracy of 86, range of 80, and a reload speed of 57. And from my melee weapon, I am running the Kukuri. Defeating the target grants all weapons attack plus 30% and crit rate plus 15% for 10 seconds. When defeating an enemy with a heavy strike, psi intensity plus 20% and restores HP by 200% of psi intensity. So now that we've discussed the weapon and the secondary weapons that pair with it, let's take a look at some damage numbers, starting with raw damage. During the damage testing, the highest single DPS hit recorded was 74,000, and I managed to hit that mark twice in the same run. By the end of the test, the total damage output from just one magazine reached an impressive 378,766. This clearly shows that despite the recent changes, the silent Anabasis still delivers a massive damage potential. Here you can take a look at my raw stats. Next, we're going to damage test when fully buffed. With the Snow Sprite Deviant, my highest DPS hit was 400,000, and the total damage reached 1,929,996. So with the Polar Jelly Deviant, my highest DPS reached 521,000 and a total damage output of 3,015,367. This setup delivers incredible sustained damage. So here you can see how my stats look once being fully buffed. Next is the Cradle. Feel free to pause at any time to read what they state. I'd like to take a quick moment to give a massive thank you to all my old and new subscribers, as well as everyone who's been watching my videos. I truly appreciate all the feedback and support you've given. It really means a lot. If you haven't yet subscribed and you're enjoying the content, consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any more Once Human guides. On that note, let's jump back in and continue. So now let's take a look at the foods and the drinks that we can use to really maximize the DPS. For the first food buff, I'm running mixed fried hot dog, used to increase damage by 20% towards enemies affected by the bullseye. For this, you'll need any one piece of meat, 2 deviated mushrooms, and 2 corn oil. I advise using deer meat as it gives you an extra 2% damage against enemies affected by bullseye. If you can, try and get hold of the Mameg Advanced Stove Gourmand for the following buffs. Dishes made at the Advanced Stove gain base effect plus 30%, effect duration plus 50%, and crafting time of minus 50%. For my next food buff, I've chosen to use the layered galaxy cake, which you can find the recipe for in Starfall crates. This buff grants a 30% elemental bonus while airborne, which is huge for maximizing damage. To maintain this buff, all you'll need to do is stay airborne by performing continuous jumps. However, if you don't like that playstyle, you can instead use the Gravity Neuralizer tactical item, whose formulas can also be obtained from Starfall crates. This alternative not only grants the same buff, but also pairs perfectly with the 2 mods I've included in this build, making it an excellent choice for a more grounded playstyle. To make the layered galaxy cake, you just need to use 1 wheat, 1 milk, 5 gravity crystals, and 1 bar. Now I'd advise using cow milk as this is the only milk that doesn't affect your sanity. Next, for our drink buffs, we're using Whimsical Drink, used to gain 25% status damage bonus. For this you'll need 1 deviated saffron, 1 normal saffron, 5 purified water, and 5 ice cubes. As mentioned before, there's a couple ways to increase these buffs even further. So, Advanced Stove Gourmand, again, dishes made at the stove gain a base effect of plus 30%, effect duration plus 50, and crafting time of minus 50%. But especially with Whimsical Drink, you want to get hold of the Ice Treat Brain Freeze. Ice Treat effect duration plus 200% and a potency of plus 30%. And for the last buff, I'm using Stardust Energy Drink, used to gain the double jump ability for 30 seconds. For this you'll need 2 saffron, 5 purified water, 5 sugar, and 3 aluminum ingots. So the reason to why I'm running Stardust Energy Drink is because when you activate the double jump, you can activate the tactical leap from your Cradle. For every 1 second spent airborne, gain 20% damage against Deviants and 10% damage against their shields for 3 seconds, up to 60 seconds. Next, let's take a look at the Deviants and the Polar Jelly in particular, as this has had a rework with the latest Frost update. So let's take a look at the Polar Jelly. The old Polar Jelly gave you continuously deals Frost status damage to surrounding enemies and forces them to move towards you, increasing Frost damage received by surrounding targets by 36%. If Frost vortexes are summoned inside the radius, create additional ice spikes. So with the update, everything stays the same, but they've gave us a 3.2% increase, so now we get 39.2%. Our second Deviant is the Snow Sprite. I'm using the Lunar Oracle version. Generate ice crystals near the target every 3 seconds. Ice crystals shatter when shot, dealing 100% frost damage to nearby targets and causing them to take plus 48% frost damage. Again, I like to use the Snow Sprite when I'm running silos and at dense locations, and the Polar Jelly for when you're running against stationary targets. So now let's take a look at some armor set combinations that really benefit the style of this gun. So for the first armor set, it's going to be Treacherous Tides. For a 3-piece, we get weapon damage reduction of 10%. When HP is below 70%, weapon damage and status damage plus 12%. And the HP reduction from low sanity is decreased by 40%. Weapon and status damage plus 10%, and further increases as your sanity drops, up to 28% at 30% max sanity. For my 2-piece set, I've decided to go with 2-piece of Shellyer for status damage reduction of 15% and elemental damage plus 8%. And for our key armor piece, I've decided to use the Snow Camo Gloves. When an ice crystal shatters, 4 additional ice missiles will launch at nearby enemies, dealing status damage equal to 50% psi intensity to targets hit, 40% damage to players, Frost Vortex damage bonus applies. This really helps when you're in ad dense locations. You pop 1 crystal, you can take out 4 to 5 ads depending on the level of difficulty. So now let's take a look at the mods that we're paired with the armor sets. So for the Anabasis, I've decided to go with the Cryo Catalyst Frost Vortex suffix. Frost Vortex damage plus 10%. After triggering a Frost Construct, Ice Spike, Ice Missile or Ice Crystal, Frost Vortex damage plus 5% for 6 seconds, with the aptitude effects of Frost Vortex damage plus 6%, Frost damage plus 4.8%, damage against Great Ones of 3.6%, and damage against elite enemies of 6%. For the Bingo, I am running Vulnerability Amplifier with the Bullseye suffix. The Bullseye adds vulnerability plus 8%, with the weak spot damage on targets with the Bullseye plus 12%, weapon damage reduction of 6%, damage against normal enemies of 4%, and damage against elite enemies of 4.5%. For my helmet mod, I am running Deviations Expert with the Lunar suffix. Range minus 25%, fire rate plus 10%, and status damage plus 20%, with the aptitude effects of damage against normal enemies plus 6%. The lower your HP, the higher your elemental damage up to 16%. The lower your HP, the higher your status damage up to 9.6%. And finally, the lower your HP, the higher your damage reduction against Deviants up to 7.2%. For my mask mod, I am running Frost Construct with the Frost Vortex suffix. Frost Constructs, Ice Spikes, Ice Missiles, Ice Crystals deal plus 10% damage. If the target is already in a Frost Vortex status, damage dealt plus another 10%. So that would mean that you get 10%. If they're affected by Frost Vortex, you get another 10%. You end up with 20% in total. With the aptitude effects of Frost Vortex damage plus 6%, damage against elite enemies plus 3%, head damage reduction plus 3.2%, and frost damage plus 4.8%. For my chest piece, I'm running the Ardent Shield Lunar suffix. While the shield is active, you gain 15% damage reduction. When the shield exceeds 1,000 single instances of damage, will not penetrate the shield. Aptitude effects. The lower your HP, the higher your damage reduction against Deviants up to 9.6%. Damage against Great Ones of 2.4%. The lower your HP, the higher your elemental damage, up to 16%. And finally, the lower your HP, the higher your status damage, up to 12%. For my legs, I've decided to go with elemental resonance, but with the downstar suffix. For each instance of elemental damage dealt from the previous magazine, the next magazine gains elemental damage plus 1% for 15 seconds upon reloading, up to 24%, with the aptitude effects of status damage plus 6%, increased by up to 3% against enemies standing at a lower level than yourself, max at 5 meters. This is why I said use the gravity neutralizer, as you're able to be higher than the enemy you're shooting. Elemental damage plus 6.4%, increased by up to 3.2% against enemies standing at a lower level than yourself. Damage against elite enemies of 4.5%, and weapon damage reduction of 3.6%. For the gloves, I've chose to go with elemental overload, but with the talent suffix. Elemental damage, blaze, frost, shock, and blast plus 18%, with the aptitude effects of elemental damage plus 6.4%, status damage of 4.8%. Damage against normal enemies of 4%, and weapon damage reduction of 4.8%. For my shoes mod, I am running the Rush Hour, but with the downstar suffix. Every 10% HP loss grants plus 4% melee, weapon, and status damage. Again, you can activate this by perma jumping or use the gravity neuralizer. Aptitude effects. Elemental damage plus 8%, increased up to 4% against enemies standing at a lower level. Head damage reduction of plus 4.8%. Status damage plus 4.8%, increased by up to 2.4% against enemies standing at a lower level than yourself. And damage against great ones plus 3.6%. And that brings us to the end of my Silent Anabasis build guide. I want to give a massive thank you to all my long-time supporters and to the new subscribers who recently joined. Your continued support is truly inspiring, and I appreciate each and every one of you. If you haven't yet subscribed, consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming guides and updates. Until next time, metters, smash those crystals.